do. Any teachers here today that never been recognized before? Raise your hands. If you are, we want to know why you aren't in school. No, no. But any visitors, this is your first time visiting our committees, please stand up and let us welcome you. Any students? We're glad to always have our students here. All right, looks like we have no visitors. Remember, be sure your phones are off. If you have any questions to any member of the committee, please come over and see Jennifer here or Kaylin. They'll take your message to one of us, and we'll meet you out there if you must talk to someone. Remember, on today's agenda, we have a big agenda. We have a lot of items, but there will be no testimony today because all these have been heard in subcommittees, so there's no testimony. It'll just be questions and testimony from the committee. So in order to start, I'd like Representative Parrish, are you ready? Would you please open our meeting with prayer, please? And that's number 9, correct? All right.
Yes, sir. Father, we praise you for this day. We thank you for all of your blessings, seen and unseen. We ask you to guide us with your wisdom today as we enter in doing the people's business. Lord, give us your knowledge, your understanding, and we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. I want to remind everyone that crossover day is Tuesday week, I think. And so everything has to be out of this committee next week. So we're going to try to get everything out. So you're going to hear bills assigned to subcommittees. I'm asking the subcommittee chairs to hold their meetings early on. You know, we're out Monday, so Tuesday, Wednesday's got to be busy times, and Thursday. We'll have our next meeting Thursday. It will be a very lengthy meeting probably because we're going to hear everything that we need to get across. So please remember that. We'll be in Friday, so that's okay. We won't be like trying to get out here to go home. So if we would, so at this time I'd like to ask Representative Casas, if he would, our Vice Chair, to please assign the bills to subcommittees.
Very well, Mr. Chairman. A few bills here. House Bill 908, we'll begin with that one. Sponsored by Representative Dickey. This is to certain individuals over 20 years old may be eligible to enroll in state charter schools. This is assigned to the full committee and will be heard next week. House Bill 844, sponsored by Representative Houston, Georgia Commission on Hearing Impaired and Deaf Persons. This is assigned to the Academic Achievement Subcommittee, which is the Chandler Subcommittee. That was HB 844. HR 1036, sponsored by Representative Kendrick. This is a constitutional, no, it's not. It's just a resolution. Fund public awareness campaign in support of computer science education. And this is assigned to the Innovation Subcommittee.
Is Representative Teasley here? There's your bill now. Okay.
We'll inform him.
I will inform him.
That's the Teasley Subcommittee. House Bill 494, sponsored by Representative Dempsey, is assigned to the Academic Support Subcommittee. This is the Cantrell Subcommittee, and this is Safety of Children and Early Care and Education Programs. That was at 494. HB 932, also assigned to Academic Support, the Cantrell Subcommittee. This is sponsored by Representative Benton to require the age of mandatory education to be raised from 16 to 17 years old. HB 932, Academic Support. House Bill 936. This is sponsored by Representative Stevens, or Chairman Stevens. This is to require that school year not begin prior to the third week of August. HB 936, that's going to Academic Support, the Cantrell Subcommittee. Good luck. And House Resolution 1162 to establish a House Study Committee on the establishment of a state accreditation process. This is sponsored by our dear chairman, H.R. 1162, and this was assigned to the full committee for hearing next week. And that's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions by committee members on any of the legislation that was just assigned? Again, I encourage each of our chairs to go ahead and get with Kalen, and please schedule your meetings. We want to try to get them in Tuesday and Wednesday, or by earliest Thursday morning. I want to hear everything that's going to have to cross over. I want it to be heard Thursday to be sure we get everything in. So that should take care of anything. If you know of any bills that we have not taken up that you've heard of or whatever, please let me know, because I want to be sure everything's taken care of. All right, any questions before we start? We're ready to start, okay? If not, I will start. My first bill is Representative Dempsey here. Representative Dempsey, if you would please come forward and sit at the table there and present your bill. This is House Bill 853. It came out of whose committee? That was in yours. Representative, please give us your recommendation of that bill.
My subcommittee voted unanimously to pass.
Okay. Any questions or comments about it? Other than that, okay. All right, Representative Dempsey, you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. HB
Pull your mic right up to you, because you have to almost eat those things.
Okay. Okay. HB 853 allows educational funding to follow public school students who are admitted under a physician's order into a licensed psychiatric residential treatment center. Georgia law currently allows for that educational funding to follow public school students receiving treatment in medical hospitals. And when a student under the responsibility of DBHDD, DHS, or juvenile justice are referred to a psychiatric residential treatment facility. This will afford consideration to all public school students who need to continue their education at the same time they are receiving long-term medical treatment and psychological treatment. It is important, particularly, that these students, and I think we see it more than ever as we wake up today, important to continue their education while receiving that treatment and not fall behind, graduate on time, and have the hope of an education that will carry them forward in their life. There are 6 PRTF hospitals in Georgia, in Savannah, Kennesaw, Atlanta, Augusta, and Douglasville. The count is a little tricky to get a hold of because it varies upon when the child is there. It's not a constant time, but the count is based on the seat time count that goes forward in October. Somewhere between an average of 300 to 500 children flow through these treatment centers. One of the things that came forward yesterday is that particularly if a child is there at the end of the year, they can miss their end of course if they're in high school, or end of grade if in elementary school testing. The facilities have the educators there to do it. This is a matter of the money, in some instances, not following the child, not leaving the school system and following the child into the place where they are trying to get better.
Chairman, the money that you're talking about, I don't know what's wrong here. There we go. That money is the money that's allotted to the school system.
It is.
And when these children leave that school system and move to this facility, that money is supposed to leave that school system and go to that with that child. Is that what you're saying?
It does.
It's just a matter of
It does.
the bookkeeping. Is that correct?
Well, somewhat, but it's a matter of the resource that the child particularly needs, not to fall behind. And
But I mean, the school system's just not sending it. Is that
And right, and it's to help with those that do not. Some are engaged in that and understand it, but some need a little help from us to make
But
sure
it would just
that they
follow
can
that
do
child from the school. Okay. And who would be responsible for sending that? The State Department, as it says? You may ask someone to answer that if you'd like.
Thank you. Dr. McGivney?
That goes to the school system is what we're talking about.
You pardon?
The FTE allocation to the school system, so it would go from the school system and follow the student to the residential.
And y'all would
treatment
take care of
facility.
that from the State
We
Department?
do that with the other RTF
Okay.
placed kids by the state.
Yes, sir, thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? I see none, so is there a motion? I have a motion to move, or do I have a second? I have a second all over the place. All in favor? Any questions? No other questions? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. All opposed, like sign. passes. Thank you. It goes to rules. So, okay, thank you. All right. Next on our agenda, we have House Resolution 354, Representative Kendrick. Then on deck would be House Bill 787. All right. You may
All right,
proceed.
thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. This is House Resolution 354, and it passed unanimously through the subcommittee and the full committee last year and got stuck in rules. But this is an urging resolution that I worked on with the Georgia Department of Education and DBHDD that would urge them to coordinate and put together a list of mental health training materials so that districts could request those lists of vetted mental health training materials from the Department of Education.
If I could ask the Department of Education, do you have any problems with this? Because we did not hear another hearing, but we heard it last year.
No, Mr. Chairman, we do not have a problem with this. In fact, we talked about this bill last year, and we have worked with BHDD, and we already have some ideas of what resources would be appropriate for school systems.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I have 28. What's your question?
I'd just like to make a comment, please.
Yes,
I
sir.
appreciate you bringing that in light of some of the things we've talked about. I think this is really important. We're trying to figure out a way to address that mental health issue. This doesn't take extra funds, but at least begins to get us started. So I just want to commend you for doing that. Thank you.
You know, Ms. Chairman Nix, I think the first bill and this one's very important. What we have, and what happened this morning or yesterday, and all we're talking about, and really again with the wraparound services we're looking before and after school, these are critical issues, and we need to all be focusing on counseling, the mental health, the health department, DFAC. So thank you so much for that comment. Any other question? All right, I'll have a motion. Do I have a motion? I have a motion do pass. Do I have a second? I have seconds again all over the place. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye. All opposed, like sign.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. It's going to rules. Now, I want to caution everyone and let everyone know I hear you saying aye, but we may take some hand votes today. Remember, members of this committee, you are required to vote. You are required to vote on every issue, either yes or no. And if you ask to be excused, you may ask for that, and we can excuse you, but you need to ask before the vote. So as we go through, because I mean, on the voice votes, it won't matter, but be sure you know. All right, next bill we have on the agenda is, we're ready for it, from Representative Hilden. If you would come forward and please explain House Bill 787. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Bonnie, good to have you with us.
Who is this?
Do all of you on the committee, I hope you know, would introduce yourself to everyone, please.
I'm Bonnie Holliday. I'm the Executive Director of the State Charter Schools Commission of Georgia.
Does a great job, fine young lady. All right. Any questions you have about that, please ask her anytime, all right? So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'll be referring to House Bill 787, which is LC 33726-3S. Under Governor Deal's leadership over the past 5 years, we've been named the #1 state in the country to do business. I think it's probably the goal of this committee and our entire body to be the #1 state in the country for education. One of the things that we've done as a body on the business side is foster a healthy business environment that's welcoming to businesses. This bill does much of the same thing. It fosters and attracts high-quality operators to provide our students with educational options here in Georgia. Just to set the stage for you all, this is a very experienced committee that knows all these sort of terms and everything, but I guess more for those in the audience, when we talk about a state charter school, a charter school is a public school. I'll say it again, a charter school is a public school. I've gotten some emails, I think, that from constituents who may not see it as the same thing, but a charter school is a public school. And for the past 10 years, charter schools have operated here in Georgia through a very controlled growth under Bonnie's leadership here. And as we do with a lot of legislation down here at the Capitol, we evaluate take data and measure over time. And as we've gone through that process of a controlled growth with charter schools, one of the things that we've determined from a policy perspective is that while charter schools are public schools, they differ in two significant ways. Number one, they're funded at about 20% less than your traditional public school. And number two, they can be closed for underperforming schools, which I think we'd all agree is the right thing to do. And so, again, just to kind of level set, I'm a numbers guy, a data guy, so to help you guys, we currently have 32 approved state charter schools in Georgia. There are 84 charter schools approved by local school districts, so for a total of about 116. Half of those state charter schools are in and around the metro area. The remainder of the half of that 32 are spread across Georgia. Half of y'all on the committee have a state charter school in your district, and hopefully with this legislation, we can be able to expand that number so everyone on the committee has a state charter school in your district. Again, just for proportionality here, state charter schools in Georgia represent about 90,000 students, or a little over 5% of the total number of students in the state, compared to roughly about 2,200 K through 12 traditional public schools. I'll now move into the bill itself. If you look at pages 1 through 7, the bill really tries to achieve three things in particular. Pages 1 through 7, number one, it allows our state charter schools to participate in what's called a RESA program. RESA is a continuing education program for our teachers. Prior to this legislation, they were able to be members kind of through contract, but now they are able to be a member and be a paid member into this organization. The second pillar of this bill, or second component, can be found on pages 8 through 9. This has to do with changing the funding formula of how we fund state charter schools here in Georgia. Currently, state charter schools are funded based on the average of the 5 lowest school districts. We would be changing that formula to the average, the statewide average, is how the new formula would read. There's also, if you read kind of the paragraph below that, lines 272 to 278-ish, those schools that operate in, for lack of a better term, a high rent district, or areas where it's more expensive to lease a property, they would receive a little bit of extra additional funding. Moving on to page 9, toward the top, that paragraph 285 to 291 deals with virtual schools. That allows them, if there is a need for them to provide a computer, ongoing maintenance, upkeep of that computer and software required, they would receive funding for that piece of equipment for the school, for the virtuals. The third pillar or component of this legislation can be found on page 10, lines 320 to 338. This piece specifically has to deal with what's called forward funding. Currently, state charter schools cannot receive forward funding, so oftentimes what we find with state charter schools is they host a lottery, and as part of that lottery process, the state charter school is way overprescribed. There's a waiting list to attend, and this would allow the school to demonstrate that need, receive funding for it, and grow within a grade. So if they wanted to add a second 8th grade class, a third 6th grade class, this would allow them the funding to do that. Currently, they do that sort of out of pocket for a period of 16 to 18 months or so, and that really constrains their cash flow. Those are the three kind of main components to the bill. I would step back and be open for questions now. I've brought my expert here and Dr. Holliday, who can answer any specific questions as it relates to state charter schools, but would be happy to hear questions, comments, thoughts from the committee.
We have questions. All right, I will call your number and you can speak. All right, 12. All right,
right here.
Representative Chairman Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 10, where you talk about the forward funding, and you said that, that charter schools were not allowed to forward fund. Are regular public schools allowed to forward fund?
Believe they are.
Mm-mm,
No,
they're not.
no, local districts don't get forward funding for new students. The difference is that, in most cases, they consist of more than one school, and so their ability to float those additional costs until the midterm budget is trued up is more viable than a single site LEA, which consists of 200 to 500 students. Our schools just simply aren't able to grow because they aren't able to front the money that's required to pay even a single additional teacher for the entire year before the midterm budget is trued up. So the difference is scale mostly. It's the local districts do not get forward funding for new students, but they are often able to subsidize the extra cost.
I know a lot of school districts would like to do that because they got kids in portable classrooms. All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I've got you in order, so you're 27.
Have the Reese's been contacted about this, your bill, and are they in support of it?
I'll let them speak to that, but yeah, we have had some dialogue with them. There's some initial concern on their part that a number of state charters would want to serve on the board, which would create some issues. That there hasn't been a need of the state charters to want to be on those boards of the Reese's, so that's not an issue. I think that was one of the biggest concerns that was expressed to me, and that's not found in the legislation. So I think that's made them comfortable, but during testimony, I'd be happy to hear from them. Yeah.
We will not have testimony, but I will, I do see some RESA people there I recognize, and I will say that I have spoken to the RESAs, and I talked to the RESAs about the additional commitment that it would take. Their biggest concern is a school system, the local education agency, it consists of several schools, and they can work with them, but this one charter school would be an agency within itself. And as we said, well, they could invite that charter people to come to some of the meetings they had for the other schools, so it shouldn't create a problem. And if they need some additional, go into schools and help individual teachers, they could do that. But they could do a lot of the things they do with because they usually represent 12, 15, 20 school systems. They could have them come into those school systems. But I have spoken to them, and if this is a real issue, I will ask one of the RESA people to speak, but at this time, I see them nodding their heads. They, as we said in our budget, they need more help. The RESAs, we're piling it on them, and they need to be sure we're giving them more money. And the biggest thing with RESAs, we must give them flexibility with their funding. Their money comes 90% from grants, categorical grants, and we must, as a State Department, whoever, give them flexibility with their funding like we do everyone else. So I think I've covered it. Is that right, Reese? They're giving me the thumbs up. So other questions? All right, I have next, number 13.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the Arthur, I just wanted to say that I am in support, and I know one of the issues that always come up is funding. And if we would just, as a state, go ahead and equalize out the funding for charter schools, whether they're up on the local school district, but more so the state charter schools, then we wouldn't have to continue to have this conversation back and forth about are the local schools able to do this, are the local schools able to do that. Would you like to comment on that part?
Yeah, well, first off, I appreciate your support. And to your point, I think this is kind of how I opened, was that charter schools are asked to do more with less. And that's the policy we're trying to close the gap on here and figure out.
All right, I have number 10.
Problem with
All right,
this.
there you
Thank
go.
you. I have it. I was concerned about the funding too that will be taken away from public education, and there's going to still be austerity cuts in the FY 2019. So how are we going to be able to fund public schools as well as these charter schools?
That's a good question. And let me maybe correct just a bit of that statement. So the funding, as we see it would work, it would actually be additive to education, in that the formula would take the funds out of the, call it $22 billion, $23 billion budget that we pass each year. And so in effect, we would be adding to our overall K through 12 spending that we have dedicated in the budget. This would not be coming out of the, call it 9 billion or so that we've got within that budget. This would be coming from the larger pie.
One thing I want to say too, Reverend Dixon, and I'm going to ask Speaker Pro Tem to speak on this just a minute, but if you'll notice in your package, I have a physical note I did request, and the physical note says that the cost of this program to do what we want to do would be about $17 million. And the thing is, this money is not coming out of QBE formula. It's not coming out of that. And this, of course, is pending funding, and it will be asked for at the midterm budget. So I want to ask, what's your number, Speaker? Number 24. Okay, if you would comment on that for me.
Yes, I would like to clarify. If we were making a change within the context of a dedicated funding revenue stream, then it would be accurate to say that it would cause a shift within that revenue stream. The example I'll give is with regard to the lottery, which funds Hope, Hope Grants, Hope Scholarship, and pre-K. If we changed the proportion to put more into pre-K, then it would be accurate to say that there would be less funding per student for Hope Scholarship and Hope Grant, because it's a constitutionally dedicated amount. Within the $22 billion budget, every dollar is fungible, and I'll give you an example. On the budget that you will be voting on before long, the big budget for the next fiscal year, the 19 fiscal year, we have in that budget, and I expect the number that we'll be voting on will be very similar, about $19 million more dollars for mental health services for children. Also contained in that budget is about $20 million more dollars for adult mental health and adults with developmental disabilities. That's about almost $40 million more dollars. Those dollars are no different than these dollars in that they are taken out of the big budget to focus narrowly on another educational program, as though that would come out of education funding would be inaccurate. I will say that these students do earn from the same formula, QBE formula, as other traditional public school students, and the so-called austerity reduction that you referred to, they are also experiencing. But this would be made up for in the amended. I'll give another example. Chairman Coleman's bill, House Bill 237, which I greatly support, a tax credit for public innovation education fund, extending that. We're not budgeting for that $5 million, which we hope to increase this throughout the legislative process to the original, I guess, $15 million. It would be inaccurate to say that that redirection of revenue will be coming out of QBE or out of another education funding. It's just a redirection, and we'll have to find that money in the sense that it will be less state money. That's all.
All right. I have number 11. Thank you. All right, number 11.
Thank you. And I might have a couple of questions or
Go for it.
concerns. But just to clarify, that's the issue. The issue is not that money is going to come out from money allocated to public schools already, but it is going to come out of our budget. And something is not going to be funded to cover this.
Correct.
And so that being the case, you mentioned, right, roughly on average 20% less is the amount that they get from regular public schools. And obviously for me, most of the questions that I have is the why, the answer to the why. Charter schools aren't asked to do less with more. They were given the privilege to have more autonomy at the obvious expense that they would not get the same amount of funding. So 20% isn't that much of a gap. And if we're talking about giving them additional general funds, what are we dropping that percentage down? 10%, 5%? And on top of that, being able to have access to RESA. At the end of the day, how much different then? Or
What's your question?
So,
All right,
and so the question is, so how then are we going to start separating the fact that we have given charter schools flexibility and more autonomy, with the understanding that they would have more accountability as to the money they get, when we're actually starting to equalize the money and the services that they get that a regular public school would?
I mean, they're held accountable to the same performance standards that a traditional public school is, with the exception they receive less money. Now, I don't see how being innovative and remarkable, I mean, they should take a haircut in money to have that right to do that.
But that is the essence of state charters, both local charters as well, that you do receive less money because you do have the flexibility and autonomy to be able to innovate and do whatever other programming that a regular public school in a district can't. That's exactly basically the tick for tack that you get. So that is essentially how it's meant to be, or how it was originally. The whole concept of school choice was sold originally with that concept. You get less, but you have more flexibility and autonomy as to how you run your school.
I guess I would just say I would love for our traditional public schools to have the same flexibility to educate each of our children, you know.
I need to clarify something here. 8 years ago, charter systems, strategic systems, every public school system, with the exception of Beaufort, I think it's Ware or Webster County, has that complete flexibility. We were talking just in budget, some people concerned because they weren't using nursing money for nurses. Well, they have that flexibility. Some schools weren't hiring counselors. Well, that's the local school's decision if they want to use that money for something else. So we do give the others this flexibility, but you are exactly right, Representative Lopez. That was it. You know, y'all need to do, but we're finding that we gave them so much less. That was the problem. All right. Next question, number 15.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Carter, yes.
Thank you, Representative.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm trying to see if I can make a complicated question simple. So,
thank you.
I really wanted to understand QBE and how all the numbers move, right, and how we got to the austerity cut. So, when you look at all of that, when you take the whole thing, that austerity cut number appears to be the same number as the deficit. So if we increased the education pie by 16 million and our revenues stay the same, then either we're going to cut some other services, or that 166 million in austerity cuts is going to go up by 17 million. And I think most of us, we are concerned. We understand we love children, we love education, and for those of you who think I'm anti-charter, I am not anti-charter. However, we know that we have a limited amount of money, and so how do we chop it up? And then I wasn't trying to offend the person who was offended when I said this was the parameters that you got when you signed up for a state charter, but it kind of is what it is. And we know that public
I know there's a question. I know there's a question.
I am. I just wanted to clear a couple of those things up. So I'm saying, so with that, I mean, I know we're talking about increasing the pie, but again, if you increase the public education pie, and we're not saying you're cutting funding for traditional, but it has to go somewhere. And if we don't cut anything, it could still end up in the austerity cut. So I really need to understand how we're going to clear that up.
I guess, I mean, this is a broader policy question that could be applied if Gwinnett County, for instance, got 500 additional students, you know, you would have to ask them that same question. The money still comes from QBE just like it would for these schools, and it would take more money out of the state budget. But when 500 students move into a traditional district, that question doesn't seem to come up because it's just assumed that those are public school students being served by public schools, and so you have to find the money somewhere. So I would just say that these schools they should fall into the category of any traditional school, and that you know, the money comes from the state budget because it's our constitutional obligation to fund them.
Right. I'm going to disagree with you just a little bit that
Last question. Ask the question quickly.
Well, you made the statement that if Gwinnett County get additional 500 students, no one is asking about that funding. That's not a true statement. I'm in DeKalb County, so we're always asking about, you know, where's our money.
Well, the same thing for any district. What I mean is, if any district absorbs new students, it's not as if the education budget shrinks. It's that money, they're funded by QBE regardless of where they go.
Yeah, that's what we do in the midterm budget now. Is that right, Chairman Dick? That's what we're doing. We just finished up the midterm budget to take care of that growth. Is that not correct? Yes. All right. Here's the order. Now I have 25, 22, 24, and 16. 25.
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to, you got, all right, there you go.
Representative Hilton, isn't it true that all children are different, and that Georgia promotes diversity, and because of Georgia promotes diversity, we're trying to create diverse ways for children to receive their education?
You know, I'm blessed to live in Gwinnett County, which is the most diverse county, I think, in all of Georgia. And I guess as a parent, too, of 3 children, I realize each one of them has diverse educational needs. And so to be able to offer them, each of our 3 children, an opportunity to be educated in a different way, yeah, I think that's why I'm a big proponent of this legislation.
22.
Representative Hilton, complete support of the bill. There seems to be a little bit of misunderstanding here, so answer this question for me. Just because state charters will now have access to RESA, will they still pay the same fee as traditional public schools?
Yes, that's
yes,
correct.
so they're paying their way. It's not being given to them free of charge.
No,
Thank
they
you.
will be a full dues-paying member of the RESA organization.
Thank you.
That's a good question, and that is true. I think it's $4 per child. Keith, you may answer. $4 per child? Every child, they pay per child, so they'll pay that. Okay, thank you. 24.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hilton, is it not true that several of the state charter schools are in fact larger in student population than some of our traditional school districts? And so it would not be accurate to say that state charter schools cannot achieve, that they cost more to a RESA per student to serve than every traditional school student.
That's correct, yeah.
And is it also not true that this entire budget book, $26 billion, includes increases and decreases, but net increases to programs throughout the entire state?
I would submit to you, you're absolutely correct. I mean, and that's why we're down here, frankly, is we're constitutionally required to pass a budget, and part of that process is deciding what's allocated to what. I mean, last year it was yachts that were getting money, this year it's and so there's constantly that sort of ebb and flow that we have to make decisions on what gets allocated.
And furthermore, Representative, is it not true that to respond to the representative's concern about if you increase one program, it has to come from another? This year, the budget grew by $700 million. That does not include federal funding. The previous year it was $300 million. The previous year it was $1 billion, and the previous year it was $1 billion. That does not include federal funds. That if one's premise is you do not like charter schools, which by the way employ public school teachers and educate public students, then one would naturally conclude you would not want them to be funded in this manner. But if your premise is that all students who attend public schools should have the, we owe them what is in our state constitution, an adequate education, then you would want them to be funded adequately.
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
We have 16, 9, and 11. You're in that order. 16?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Hilton, for bringing the bill. I'd like to clarify 2 things. One, can you speak to the issue of the deal, the so-called deal that charter schools make? It was never my understanding that the deal was that we will give you more flexibility with less money, but rather we will give you more flexibility with a different level of accountability. For instance, a charter school, if it doesn't perform, can be graded, we've had this discussion on this recently, it can be graded and shut down. Can you speak to that issue? My understanding was the deal is more flexibility, yet more accountability, and not necessarily less funding.
I'm still a freshman legislator, so there's people in this room and someone to the right of me who can speak to sort of the history of how they've been funded over the time, and I think that would be a helpful education to the members of this committee, sort of the process of how state charter schools have been funded over time.
I think it'd be great, so if you would, you did a great job yesterday explaining that, so explain that, please.
You're right. state charters are currently funded. They don't receive any local funding, so they receive a state supplement to offset the lack of local dollars, and that's based on the 5 lowest funded districts. And to your earlier point, I don't think there is some validity in the argument that flexibility spurs innovation, and efficiency is the name of the game. You know, you want to leverage every dollar to the hilt. You want to do as much with it as you possibly can, and the idea is that flexibility will allow you to do that. But to Representative Teasley's points, and I'm not trying to get religious on you, but when Jesus fed the multitudes with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, he didn't do it by being very efficient with how he divvied up the rations. You know, it was a bona fide miracle. And so when you look at how our schools are supposed to educate these kids, absent some sort of divine intervention along those lines, they're not going to be able to do it, because the 2 ways that it really hits them is teacher salaries. That's almost 90% of every school in the state's budget. So when you only have this much money and you allocate 90% of it to teachers, you're not going to be able to compete with someone who has this much money and they allocate 90% of it to teachers. And what we see, especially in the metro area, is you know, we've got half of our schools located in the metro area, all of which fund at much higher rates. So they're competing for the same talent, but our schools can't offer competitive salaries, no matter how much they allocate in their budgets. And we all know that teachers and leaders make the difference in terms of student achievement. So they are being as efficient as possible, but when you can't compete for human capital, then it puts you at a significant disadvantage. To your point, they're doing as much as they can and they're being as efficient as possible, but they have some handicaps that are difficult to overcome at their current funding level. The other piece that we don't account for is they get significantly less money, and then they have an expense that traditional schools don't necessarily incur, and that's a facilities cost. And our schools pay about 15% of their budget. It goes toward a facility because they're not guaranteed a facility that's provided by a local district, whereas local district schools, even local charter schools, are often provided a district at low or no cost that's owned by the district. So they have less money, they're not able to pay competitively, and they have to allocate significant portions for a building to house the students. And yet we hold them to a standard that is at least as good as and often higher than the districts that they serve, to your point. So I don't think anyone wants to give up the argument that efficiency is important, but you have to, there's a point of diminishing returns that you have to acknowledge when money doesn't matter. Money isn't everything, but money matters when there's just not enough of it to cover the basic needs.
And I think one thing that people are worried about, I remember when we started the charter schools years ago, oh, there's going to be so many of them that it's going to be out here. But you probably approve what, 10%, 15% of the applications you get. And the one thing you didn't mention that you mentioned the other day that I think is very important, in public schools, if you don't do well, we have to send the chief turnaround officer in there, but yours, they're shut down. Is that not true?
That's right. It should be considered a win-win because, you know, charter schools earn their right to exist 1 year at a time, 1 term at a time. So you give them a chance. If they do well, they're providing a better education for students. If they don't do well, they close. That's the only difference between a charter and a traditional school. A low-performing traditional school could, in theory, operate in perpetuity, but a low-performing charter school goes away in 5 years.
And many of them were. That's why we passed that bill last year, 338, to take care of trying to handle that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
I had one other
right?
quick question.
Yeah.
And that is, I don't have the 15, 16, and 17 budgets in front of me, but over the last several years, I seem to remember that we have been very fortunate to have more revenue come in than we had budgeted for, and so we've made additions to the rainy day fund over the last 3 years in particular, reaching the point where we're very pleased. I think we're approaching $2.5 billion in terms of our rainy day fund. And to Speaker Pro Tem Jones's point, if we're willing to spend $40 million on mental health, which is certainly an appropriate place to spend it, it would seem plausible to me that if we have a track record of having more revenue come in than we have budgeted for, that $10 million, when we've been able to add to our rainy day fund over the last 3 years, would be an appropriate move on our part. So I guess
Thank
that was
you.
a point
All right.
rather than a question.
This, number 9. Okay, is it 9? Yeah, okay. Okay. What number are you there? All right, what you, push, there you go, now, there you go, now you're on. Well, go ahead, try. The green button, there's a little, behind you, got a little button.
Okay, it's on now.
There you
Thank
go.
you, appreciate it. So I don't have, I support funding education, and I don't have an issue necessarily with allocating more funding for state charter schools. But I question just the order of priorities that we have in terms of if we do have this extra money from the general budget. One, being able to fully fund the QBE formula, and two, if there's enough funding even to implement our turnaround strategy for House Bill 338. So my question is just, have you heard from local school systems? Have there been any pushback from any of them or opposition against this?
Yeah, I guess let me address your first point. So again, this additional funding is not coming at the expense of our existing funding for traditional public schools. So it's additive. Have I heard from most of the feedback I've gotten is positive from both parents and the charter schools. I have not heard from people.
One thing that's important to note is when a state charter school does open within a local district, the district retains all of that local revenue. None of it follows the students. So in some districts, including APS, we have a school, Atlanta Heights, that operates in APS, and I think the amount of local revenue that the district retains based on the number of students that actually go to the state charter school is over $1 million. So in some cases, there's a benefit to the district to have a state charter located there because they're able to keep all the local revenue, and yet they're not having to educate those students.
Yeah, they keep the local money while the school goes to the charter. Yeah.
Reverend Cantrell, in your hearing, did you have any systems comment or what number? All right.
No, sir, we had no negative testimony during subcommittee at all.
Okay. Next is a number 11.
Well, one of the questions was addressed, right? As you mentioned, the state charters have to earn their right to be open. That being the case, they earn it with, again, the amount of money we have. And I completely understand that it's not coming out of the traditional public schools, but it's coming out of the rest of the budget. So the question being, I think Representative Nguyen touched on that, is that this is about where we're prioritizing money. If we're saying $17 million, why are we not funding something that was really important, like 338 from last year for underperforming schools, and shift money to that? That's really what we're talking about. And again, and I don't think that you answered my first question, which was, if state charter schools are getting just about as close to about the same money and similar services, then what then will distinguish them from a traditional public school?
Well, I guess I opened my comment saying a charter school is a traditional public school.
But it's not under state law. It's got other regulations, and that's why we're now adding them on, or are considering adding them on to different funding.
Well,
They're public schools. I understand they're public schools, but they do fall under other guidelines and regulations that traditional public schools do not. So where's the distinguishing factor then, if we're equalizing the amount of money that they get and similar services?
Yeah, we're still not equalizing.
No,
it's
it's not.
it's
Getting there. I know it's not the
closer.
same.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. There is more. There would be more equity if this bill passed. True.
So what's the difference? What would then be the difference between a state charter and a traditional school? Then why aren't they just go back to a traditional public school model, and then they would get the same amount of money and the same services that local school district gets?
I mean, if nothing would please us more than if local districts wanted to take state charter schools that are located within their attendance zone and make them local charters. But what we've seen is that's not happening, and these These are schools that are created to provide choice, and they're held to a standard that insists that they exceed the performance level of the local district. So, I mean, that's why they exist, to improve student performance.
Bonnie, I think it'd be helpful if you would mention the 3 types of charter schools so they understand. They're all public schools, but they're formed different ways. To talk about traditional and the local and, yeah.
Yes, sir. There are locally approved charter schools, and those can be startup schools or conversion charter schools. And there are state charter schools that operate under the authority of our office. And then there are also charter systems, which often get thrown in here, but that's a completely different animal and a different discussion for a different day. They're also schools of innovation, but they don't belong in this particular discussion. So those are the types of charters that we have in Georgia.
And the state charter schools exist because many locals didn't want to, and their parents wanted an option, so that's why you have the state charter schools. Is that not correct?
That's right. It was established in many ways as
And
sort
by
of,
law, established in the law.
Right. They were established in many ways to provide sort of an appellate court or avenue for a charter to seek authorization, because the majority of districts in Georgia don't even have a process to receive and review a charter school application, and so the thought that they would then approve one, I mean, is the chances are slim, because there's not even an application in the district.
And I think it's critical to know this. The state funds about 40 to 50% of a school system. They don't, that's it. It's depending on the system and where it is. 50% at the most, let's say, of the money that you need to educate a child, the state funds. By law, we're supposed to be funding more, but we just haven't done it, don't do it. Then the locals have to fund the rest, so that's what we're talking about, this local money. And the thing you need to remember now, these charter schools get the state money, but they don't get, as you mentioned, the local money. And what we're trying to do is help these public schools to get that. They get some, but don't get enough of that local money. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we're nowhere near I mean, we looked at alternatives. We were pressed to get near equal, but I mean, we are still very far off the mark from being equal. I mean, this moves the needle, but it doesn't get us all the way there by any means.
And don't forget, all right, now we're going to take we have 2 more questions now, and there's it. All right, I have 24 and 13. Where's my 13? All right, I have you. All right, 24, you're first. You had where's 24? All right. 24, all right.
I'd just like to give a little
All right.
historical perspective to address the question of what makes them different, why have them. We started having state-authorized charter schools in '08, which was the first bill I passed regarding them. In '07, local school boards denied every single startup charter school application. In '08, 25 of 27 were denied. In 2000, from '08 to 12, when we had a constitutional amendment, only 4 were approved. So it was to address a desire by our constituents. When there was a constitutional amendment put on the ballot statewide, I would venture to say maybe not every one of your districts, but almost every one of your districts, with exception of maybe one, approved it. It was approved by 58% of Georgia voters. The county with the highest approval in the state at 71% was Clayton County. Democrat majority counties actually approved the charter school referendum at a higher rate than Republican majority counties as voting in presidential elections. So to respond to why have them, because our constituents wanted this. And as Bonnie mentioned, nothing would make us happier than to have local school systems approve some. And in fact, we have seen an increase since the beginning, since we passed the legislation to allow state charter schools, so that there's at least a safety valve and an option. Additionally, many of these schools are very different. We have 2 virtual schools statewide. Most students do not have that option. Some students, some parents want that option. The last subcommittee meeting, we had testimony by, must have been the headmaster or principal of one of them, who had a single gender school, and he could not get that locally approved. We have a couple of those. And so it's to provide different types of education. It's not just who can do it the cheapest, but these are, and I will furthermore mention that the National PTA strongly supports all public charter schools regardless of who the authorizer is. This is becoming mainstream, and primarily because local school districts are approving more of them, which those who support charter schools greatly support. But with regard to the flexibility, we have given great flexibility to almost every school system. We have charter systems that have great flexibility, but we haven't specifically reduced their funding because we've given them more flexibility. And finally, I will say, a budget is made up of making choices. One of the choices that we are making this year is to fund not just the $1.6 billion for TRS, Teachers Retirement System, that was in the formula, but we added $367 billion to that, or $367 million, almost reaching $2 billion of this budget for TRS, which I support. If you're wondering what crowded out some of the money for that remaining, almost rounding error, frankly, austerity cut out of, it's actually over $9 billion we put in K through 12. You can look at our retirement programs, and I think most of us would say we support that. Thank you.
All right, last question, number 13. Oh, I'll take one more. I see a light came on just before. There's one more. Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to make sure that the members understand that the definition of a public school is a school where children are not charged a tuition. And if you use that specific statement and you apply it to every charter school that's located in the state of Georgia, that is what makes it and warrant them to be public schools. And the difference is that parents chose those particular options rather than the traditional setting. And a lot of times parents go back and forth, but that's the choice that those parents have. And I did want to ask Bonnie to please also clarify what is the requirement for a state charter to come before the Charter Commission as to the difference that it has to be not the same as a local traditional school is offering as well as the education that takes place within those walls.
Yeah, the mission of the SCSC is lest we seem anti-district, it's not an us versus them dynamic, and I'm afraid it's been set up like that today, but that's not what we're about, and I don't think that's what districts are about. In fact, we have we have 3 schools in particular that the entire boards are comprised of local district superintendents, and it's dropout recovery schools. We have Mountain Education, Charter High School that serves Northeast Georgia, Foothills that serves just south of there, and then now Coastal Plains that's on the Atlantic coast. And it's conglomerates of districts that have come together and said, we recognize that we have a problem and there's a population of our students that we're not serving well. Let's get together, petition the commission, start a state charter school to serve these students who have been unsuccessful in traditional environments. So in many ways, there's a lot of collaboration that goes on, and I just want to call that out because in many cases, we are appreciative of the districts and their efforts. To Representative Stovall's direct question, our mission is to improve public education throughout the state overall, to improve public education by authorizing high-quality charter schools that provide students better educational opportunities than they would otherwise be afforded. We don't exist, the choice between a bad hospital and a worse hospital is not a choice. None of us would accept that in terms of health care, so we shouldn't accept that in education. So we think that the commission exists to provide, to create lighthouse schools that can spur innovation and help boost public education throughout the state, and in particular and within individual districts specifically. So yes, we hold them to a standard. They have to outperform their district in terms of achievement or growth or value-added impact, or they have to perform at least as well in one of those categories. But in most cases, to earn a 5-year renewal, you need to be outperforming.
All right, the chair is going to go ahead and call for a vote. So I don't see any more lights on. Everybody's had a chance to vet. We've talked about it. We've discussed it. It had a full hearing with a packed house, so it has been talked about and talked about and talked about. So I'm entertaining a motion at this time. I have a motion to move. Do I have a second? I have a second. I have a question, number 11.
Call for an amendment in
Pardon?
appropriate time.
I have, now would be that time.
Under section.
And you need to speak up, well, yeah. All
I'm
right,
sorry,
what-
I'll speak into the microphone.
Yeah, right in the mic, yeah.
Under section.
Hold on just a second. Betsy, you ready for this? All right.
Well.
All right, go
because-
ahead.
Because we have a lot of money coming into our budget for these next fiscal years, apparently. Under section 6, after line 271, after and. Where am I?
Give us your line. The line.
The line would be
271, okay.
271, yes. And ongoing austerity cuts to QEB would be offset to $150 million instead of the current $167 million.
All right. Betsy, do you have that? I don't know if
Or
we
let me
can't do that.
reword
I don't
that.
think we can do that, can we? We don't have the authority to do that, so I don't think you can. Chairman will rule, I'm just waiting to see what she got.
I'm sorry?
Is that it? Say that
Yes,
again?
Yes, I didn't hear the part that you said.
Betsy, say it where they. That's what I said. Chair was gonna rule, but I was trying to see what the amendment was. You got me.
Well, but we can add then that our intention is to decrease the austerity cuts to QEB by the $17 million. Would that be more appropriate?
You can't put an amount.
Okay.
So you hear all right, so what's your amendment now?
Okay, let me go back. And to decrease the ongoing austerity, and for our intention to decrease the ongoing austerity cuts to QEB. Well, spelled out, QEB. QBE, yes.
Betsy, you have that? All right, and here's what the amendment is. Everyone listen, all right? And give us the line and section where we'll know.
Correct, and.
Add the language, and is the intention of the General Assembly to decrease the ongoing austerity cuts under the Quality Basic Education Act.
Is that it?
That's fine.
Representative Lopez?
Yes.
Okay, you hear the amendment, all right? What? I was gonna take, anybody, is that the amendment? Any other amendments? All right, any other amendments? All right, question 24.
Yes, I'd like to ask the chair to rule on the germaneness of the amendment as to whether it pertains to charter schools.
The chair rules that it doesn't, Betsy. I think I'm right, don't you?
It's procedural, so it's at your discretion.
It's my discretion. I'm gonna let us vote on it, all right? We have the amendment. I'm gonna let us vote on it. All right, you have the amendment, all right, and we're gonna take a vote on it. So Betsy, at this time, read the amendment.
On line 271, add the language, and it is the intention of the General Assembly.
I'm sorry. Correct my vice chair. I need a second on the amendment. All right, got a second? Second. All right, we have a motion and a second. All right, now you're voting on the amendment, so one more time. Now listen what the amendment is. We're gonna take a vote, all right?
Okay, on line 271, after school systems, add the language, and it is the intention of the General Assembly to decrease the ongoing austerity cuts under the Quality Basic Education Act.
All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed by the like sign. It's obvious that it's defeated. So we go back to the original substitute. We're now voting on LC 337263S bill. We have a motion to do pass. We have a second. All right, I'm going to ask all in favor of the passage of this piece of legislation, please indicate 778 by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
It's obvious that it passed, so the bill passes, so you take it on.
Thank you.
If anyone require a hand vote, I'll take it, but I think that's good. The chair rules it's passed. Okay. All right, you got to go to a. That's more important. Go see your grandson. All right, if you would, thank y'all so much, and that will go to rules. Next, we have on the agenda. Okay, sorry y'all had to wait around, but we're ready to go. That was a good. All right, John Corbett, are you here, John? Yes, sir. All right, we're now hearing House Resolution 1017. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you today House Resolution 1017. Basically, all this resolution does just encourages schools and educational agencies to recognize dyslexia as a profound educational impact and needs to be addressed. And what brought this about, I had a call from a constituent over the summer. I met with her. Her son was diagnosed as being dyslexic. He was going into the 2nd grade. And anyway, she had to do testing basically on her own to determine that. She was just being told that her child was just learning to read slower because he was a boy. They learn slower. And anyway, she didn't accept that and went and got testing done and proved that. But anyway, through research, there's a test out there that they can, with a 92% accuracy, can diagnose dyslexia at age 5.5 to 6.5. So basically, all this bill does just encourage the schools to recognize it and hopefully be able to address the problem. But her child got the proper teachers and stuff he needed to help him learn. She sent me a copy of his second report card this past December, all A's. So the help's out there. We just need to get it to them. And 1 in 5 kids that have a learning disability, dyslexia is the problem. So 20 out of 100. That's if we can, help 20 out of 100. Whatever we can do to help those, I'd like to encourage that.
All right. Do you have any questions? Have any questions on House Resolution 1017? I have one. Yes, Representative Lopez.
This is just a comment. Thank you for bringing the resolution forward. I have self-diagnosed dyslexia, so I understand, which is why I invert my letters and my numbers from time to time. So apologies for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? All right. Do I have a motion? Move. I have a motion. Any second? I have second. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? It passes. Go right on. That was hey, I'm sorry you had to sit around for 2 hours. That's all right. We're glad you're here.
I enjoy getting to listen to you run a committee. You do a great job.
All right. Next, let's go to, is Michael Smith here? Come up here, Representative. All right. House Bill 852, Representative Michael Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. What I have before you is HB 852. It's a very simple bill. What it will do is that it will allow students that move to a different school's attendance zone be able to attend that initial public school. Now, there are a few requirements. They have to provide their own transportation, no behavior or attendance issues, and they must reside within the same county or municipality, or more specifically, the school district.
Reverend Cantrell, this was in your committee. Is that correct?
Unanimously.
And we're operating, I meant to say, I'm sorry, from a substitute, LC 337341S, right?
Yes, sir.
And you made this permissive, is that correct?
Yes.
It's permissive, all right? And we do know, and we want to mention to everyone that local systems right now have the right. They can be a charter system, they can be a choice system, and they can allow this if they want to. Some do and some don't, and this is simply encouraging them to do that. Is that correct?
Absolutely right, Mr. Chairman.
All right, 16, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Smith, for bringing the bill, and I certainly like this concept. Can you speak to why only within the local attendance zone, the local school system?
Well, right now, some of the schools, the schools are actually funded through local taxes as well. And if that parent or students move to a different, I guess, county, they would no longer be paying taxes in that local system.
Okay, but it is if they've already attended the over half the year, presumably the QBE funding has already followed the child to that school. And so, okay. And so I'm thinking of a scenario, for instance, in the county I live in where North County you and I both live in, fairly close to each other within driving distance, Etowah High School in Cherokee County is just barely above North Cobb High School in northern Cobb County. And it's quite possible that somebody would move from North Cobb into the Etowah district, but not very far of a drive. And so, I mean, I'm going to support your bill regardless of whether we deal with this issue or not, but I can't see a reason why if they were to move from the North Cobb district to the Etowah district, that we shouldn't also allow.
Let me say this, Mr. Chairman, if I could. You remember Alicia Morgan?
I do.
She had that same concern you had, so she passed a piece of legislation that I think was very good, and that allows that. Buford's a good example. Decatur, as long as you move and you pay that tuition, that local tuition, you can do it. So school systems, as we talked about that, have that right now. In other words, if you move from Cobb to Cherokee, if the Cherokee wanted to let you stay there, you could pay that. They can allow it. So that can be allowed. And he's just encouraging them as they move, so they can already allow what you're asking.
Okay, well, I can just say, as a realtor, I can appreciate people who move
Certainly.
during the middle of the school year and want to be able to not uproot their, I mean, this would give my clients an opportunity to go ahead and move and not have to worry about whether or not they've got to move school districts at the same time.
And he and I talked with some systems, and many systems, just what you're saying, if they move in the middle of the year, they allow them to finish if they want to. I mean, many systems already allow that. What you're saying, we're moving, well, you can go ahead and finish here. You know, you've been 5 months, so that's at discretion of the local system. But this is encouraging them all to do what you're saying.
Okay.
Absolutely. And when I drafted this bill, I actually had you making money in mind.
Oh, we know what it is now, yeah. Representative Carter, I don't want to belabor this, but you seem like you got something you just have to add to this, all right?
Well, the only point I wanted to make is I think I brought this up in subcommittee about if someone moved to another district, allowing them. And you have made the point that there's a law that allows them to pay that. But I think the intention is that if the kid is in that school system and the parent moves, that the student could be allowed to stay in that school district even though they're out of district without the additional compensation. I think that was the spirit that we brought it up in the committee. So.
And they could.
We're not asking you to amend your...
But they could do that, I'm saying. He's got, all right, 13, what do you have to add to that, Representative Stovall? Say amen and let's move on.
Okay. Is it not true to the sponsor of the bill that this is a bill of choice that's being able to allow parents to be able to choose to have their child remain in that particular school even though they have actually moved out of that local school district?
It is.
Thank you so much. All right, do I have a motion? Have a motion in a second? All in favor? All opposed? Do pass. You take it on. You get it out of Rouge now. You're ready. You're
Thank
good. All right, let's see where we are now. We have Representative West Cantrell. This is going to be. Oh, no, David Clark. I'm sorry, Representative David Clark. Yo, you wait. David Clark, I'm sorry. You've sat there so patiently. All right, come on up here, Representative Clark. I'm sorry. I would never do you that way. He's one. I know it. Thank you so much. All right. Now, Representative Clark is working on House Bill 743. All right.
Thank you, Chairman, and to the committee members. Thank you. I bring House Bill 743, and just to answer a question right off, it does say substitute. You might be asking why, and to answer that, on section 2, line 24. Before I draft up the bill, I made sure to sit down with all the parties involved who it would affect, and we had talked about making it 9th through 12th grade, and I forgot to do that, so I had to go back and do a substitute. So that's the only change from the original bill that I had dropped in the House. The reason for dropping this bill originally was, for my district, there were two kids just in the last few years who had dropped dead while playing sports. And most of you, if you go back in your district, you'll probably see that you probably have a few kids also in the last so many years that the same thing has happened. They say around between 600 to 1,000 kids it affects in the United States who have sudden cardiac arrest and die. So from that, and from also the I think Siri wanted to talk and say something. Talking also to the Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, I saw that we need a bill like this. They have Project Save, and they go into schools and help train kids and the staff on what to do if sudden cardiac arrest happens and the symptoms and all that. And they have, from their organization, they have saved since '07, just going into so many schools, they have saved almost 100 students and adults from that. And 2 were school nurses who were supposed to be the ones who saved lives, and they were saved. And so in the bill pretty much follows from, I think it was 2012, the same protocol for the concussion training and awareness. It follows the exact same pretty much guidelines. And also, just to answer the question that y'all might be wondering and ask is, how much is it going to cost? And if you go into section 2, line 31, it says, in developing the guidelines and materials about the nature and warning signs of sudden cardiac arrest, the Department of Education may utilize educational videos available at no cost to the state. The Children's Healthcare of Atlanta and many other organizations have stepped up and said they will help out provide all the material that they need. So that's been handled, and we've discussed that with everybody that it would pertain to. So that pretty much answers the bill in that way. And I also just say that I think through this awareness and training that we'll bring to schools, that it will not just save kids on the field of play or at school. Think about these kids having this training, understand the symptoms, that when they go home, they could possibly save their parents, they could save grandparents, they could save somebody at the mall. It does more than just save lives at school. And I just think, by voting for this and passing this out of committee, and 2 rules that, even possibly you could be saving your own life, because there would be kids being trained on this, understand the symptoms, because a lot of times you are able to see symptoms before it even happens. And so I just say that if we don't prevent that now, we're going to pay later with more lives, and this will save lives. So I'll be glad to answer any questions.
If you would, please explain what's going to happen. In other words, your bill, we talk about the cardiac,
yes.
What is the training, what's it going to
at
entail?
the beginning
If you would
of,
walk us through it, tell us, in other words, who's going to do the training, who's going to be trained, and how they're going to be trained, yeah.
Yeah, glad to. What this will do is at the beginning of each season, that sports team, that high school, they would just go through, it could be a video, just go over the symptoms, what to do if it happens, and how to react and all that. And they will also, just like with the concussion protocol, they would sign, their name saying they watched up and they understand the symptoms and what could happen. And then also, there could be handouts to the parents and all that. So that's what would go on. And the, it could be the coaches, athletic trainers, going over this, handing it out, watching the video with the athletes. But we do try to give the schools as much flexibility to teach it how they would like to, but just that they would watch a video or go over some material to help the kids out and bring awareness and understand the symptoms. So hopefully that answers the questions on what the bill would cover.
What kind of liability does the coach have? If they don't do or don't react, is there any liability?
You can go to section 2, line 69. It says, no coach shall be liable for his or her actions or inactions under this code section unless he or she is found to have acted in a negligent or reckless manner. So, it's pretty much the same thing as the concussion protocol.
Okay. All right.
So
Do I have any
covers
questions? I see no questions. Yes, number 9.
Just had a comment, Chairman. Thank you.
Yes.
Representative Clark. We heard this bill in subcommittee, and we also, and just a comment, we heard it in subcommittee. One of the parents was there of one of the young men that had fallen, and it seems to really be addressing something that is of extensive need on the fields, in the schools, and I think, like he said, it will help even beyond the schools. So I'm certainly in favor of this bill.
All right, number 24. Thank you for that thank you for that comment. All right, number 24.
After all those questions I got, I just had to ask a question. Do schools currently hold meetings? And does this apply to all sports?
Yeah,
And have
all
you,
sports in
Okay.
in schools. Yeah, in schools, all sports.
Are they already having these types of meetings?
I mean, just like Children's Health Carolina, they do go into so many schools, but it's not officially done in every school, in every sport. So it's just to make sure that's covered, that they are getting the training on it. I also just, when I dropped this bill, I got a call from a sports, a college sports writer, and he called me, and you might have seen just last week in the news about that football athlete who went to Florida, and they caught a heart problem, but he had had it all through, middle school, high school, and so he could have dropped right there on the field. Thank God it was caught. So this is something that's, I think 12 states now have passed stuff like this, training in schools, and it's catching on. And I mean, I forget how many other states now have dropped this type of legislation on moving forward. So it's definitely something that has brought awareness to it, and something that I think it will save lives.
Have the schools given you any kind of feedback as to whether they're for, against it, or neutral? Or
I've sat down with everybody who it would involve, the state superintendent, the high school association, everyone, and they've given a thumbs up and said it's okay.
Why don't we, I'll let Representative Cantrell, since you heard it, that's a good question. What kind of feedback did you get?
Back. Very positive. Everybody was positive and felt like it fit in with existing protocols. And the folks that were there from the education community said it would fit in real easily to the meetings that they're already taking place.
I think the Georgia High School Association was present at your meeting also.
They were, and they were in favor as well.
Yeah. All right. Gary, I hate to put you on the spot. Amen? Huh? Sir? Yeah, my hero, Gary, yeah.
We support the bill.
I knew, I felt you.
And
You
we
see any
talked to s-
major
we talked
cause,
to
major difficulty providing the materials or whatever?
No, sir. The American Heart Association is willing to step forward, and Children's Care of Atlanta is willing to step forward.
And
I did
also
talk-
Commissioner Hines supported it too, didn't he?
Yes, we talked to
Yeah, he supported
Robin Hines, and he supported it as well.
Good. All right. Any other questions? All right. Do I have a motion? Thank you. I have a motion to move. Do I have a second? Any discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye. All opposed, like sign. All right, our last bill. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Clark. Take it forward. And the last bill we have now is Representative Cantrell, and that's House Bill 762.
I'd like to thank the chair for saving the best for last. If you look at the bill real quick,
Motion, send back to the. All right.
it's a very simple bill. If you look at lines 36, 37, and 38, I'm a former public school educator myself, and I understand that we ask a lot of our teachers. And so I'm very hesitant to add anything else to their already full plate. In some ways, it might be too full. But the issue before us today is just simply too important to ignore. So this can't contain a mandate. It requires, it says the course shall also include annual age-appropriate sexual abuse and assault awareness and prevention education in kindergarten through grade 9. In our schools currently, we teach our kids how to handle, if they're in case of fire, in case of tornado, how to handle a stranger, how to, we teach them to say no to drugs, but we currently are not required to teach them, what to do if they're being touched inappropriately or abused or assaulted. So I'm confident a lot of our systems are currently already addressing this issue and doing a very good job of it, but I don't personally feel comfortable until I know that all our schools are doing a good job of this. So why is it so important? You guys know the stats. 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused by the age of 18. I'm sure you probably know a student who's been through this, or an adult who's got it in their past. And most parents and teachers do a good job warning their kids about strangers, but the reality is that over 90% of the time, this abuse is done to children by someone they know and trust. Often it's a close relative, a parent, a step-parent, a sibling, a cousin, an uncle. Clearly, I believe that this should be the job of parents. Unfortunately, many parents are the abusers themselves, or they're too close to the situation to handle it honestly and correctly. Georgia's children need to know if they're being abused, and they can't go to their parent. We know they're very likely to go to their teacher, and they need to know that that's not only okay, but it's advised. So the law is written in such a way, you can see how simple it is. It's to give maximum flexibility to our schools to figure out the best way to implement this program in courses that they're most likely already teaching. No curriculum's mandated, no amount of time is mandated. It's simply mandated this topic must be taught. In 2015, President Obama signed the Every Student Succeeds Act, and in that bill there's federal funding provided for every state to implement this measure. So it's not an unfunded mandate. Every school has access to free curriculum if they so choose. And 31 states have already implemented this measure, and we need to get Georgia on that list.
Thank you. Isn't it true that last week we passed a bill in the House that posted a number? If a child felt they had been abused or whatever, they could call that number that we ask schools to do that. Is that not true?
That's correct, Mr.
So this
Chairman.
just follows through with that right along.
And this would be that number would be another resource for children,
right?
If they needed to call someone anonymously to.
And if I could, Gary,
help.
isn't it true that we're talking about making this part of the curriculum? Isn't it true that the state is in the process now of revising this program K through 12, and that this could easily be implemented as we're revising that program?
Yes, sir. We're revising the health and PE standards, and this could be incorporated into that revision.
It's happening as we speak, getting ready to happen, so that's good. So, all right. 20, your light was on first. Representative Casas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Cantrell. I want to ask a couple of questions. One with my policymaker hat, and then the second one I'm going to follow up with, like you, spending 12 years teaching high school. Let's go with policy first. I think you've stumbled onto a code section. I know this is not the intent of your bill, but it's a convoluted section. If you look at subsection B, it's got shall and may language all over the place. It's permissive, but yet it is required. And so we require them, but then they may include, but then we require them again. And so just an encouragement, if this is a section that we want to later on as a policy-making body, it may need some restructuring.
Good point.
So that's the policy making. The other hat is being a high school teacher and knowing the things that are put on our teachers. To say that it's now prescriptive, you shall include these things, but then in your later sections say that training is may language. I would just feel more comfortable that if we're going to require this kind of teaching, that we require training. I mean, I wouldn't know where to start if I was a teacher that had to teach about sexual abuse and assault awareness, and the district hasn't provided training for me.
Right.
So I wonder if the committee can consider that.
I certainly wouldn't oppose it.
All right, question. All right, 24.
Thank you, Representative Cantrell. I echo some of the same comments of Chairman Costas there. Taking off the policymaker hat, putting on kind of the dad hat. I have a kindergartner, and I know you've got age appropriate in there, which is perfect. But I just try to think of her understanding. I'm curious if you sat down with people who do this for, and how that's sort of translated to that child. I don't know. Kindergarten just seems real young to be starting to. And I know the issue's there and it's happening, but just how you translate that to a child at that age.
Yeah, it is a challenge, but I think our educators are up to it. Good touch, bad touch kind of things, public, private, those kind of things. are the approach very simple, doesn't have to be complicated. Unfortunately, the research shows that a lot of this abuse starts that early. And so we need to equip kids appropriately as early as possible. I wish we didn't have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, any other questions? 9?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
Representative, so you were saying that this is somewhat federally funded?
The curriculum is available through federal funding if a school chooses to access it.
Okay, so
But we didn't prescribe that they had to use that curriculum.
Okay.
And I think it's important.
There are
also
plenty of free resources available.
Representative, to notice what Gary McGivney said, Mr. McGivney, that they are in the states in the process of doing the standards and making some recommendations of equipment and materials too. That'd be good.
Thank you.
Is that correct? Did I misquote you, Mr. McGivney? Okay.
I was
Right.
just trying to make sure that it's not one of those things that the current administration could, repeal or that kind of.
Oh, well, I guess anything's possible.
Okay.
Okay.
Any more questions? All right, what I'm going to do, I have a couple of amendments that want to be offered, but I need to, first of all, get a motion on the bill. Do I have a motion? I have a motion to move. Do I have a second? I have a second. Now, I have an amendment here from number 20, all right, Representative Casas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I would offer, since the intent of the author is to require the age-appropriate sexual abuse and assault awareness, I offer an amendment, and we would start with page 1, line 4, to change may to shall include programs. That's on line 4, page 1. Change may to shall. And on page 3, line 62, such requirements shall also include participating in. And in line 91 of page 3 also, line 91, changing may to shall also include in-service training programs. I do have a question for Legislative Council. By making these requirements, because we don't want to, again, create these burdens, is it understood under these code sections, because I don't see the entire code, that only the teacher that's going to be responsible for teaching this course would be required this training, or are we requiring all teachers?
Section 2 is PSC renewal certification.
Requiring them all, that's quite extensive.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that's a mammoth.
Is there ever language that you would just focus on that specific certification?
Well, you could, in section 3, which just deals with local board in-service training, and they would be the ones, I guess, who could determine which teachers are teaching that. So you could maybe still change that to shall, but and qualify it by saying to only apply to teachers who will be teaching that course.
Can we do that at the professional standards also, or
You can, but well, that's for renewal certification.
So you can't do it. You'll create a nightmare.
Yeah.
A nightmare. Gary, you need to say anything?
Yeah.
What do you say?
He's going to wait until we figure it
Yeah.
out. Then maybe
We don't want to create a nightmare for all teachers getting recertificated. You're talking about
Yeah.
another course and other certification.
How about, Mr. Chairman, if I'm allowed to revise and extend my remarks here, and on line 62, to leave that as may for renewal, but in section 3 for the locals, to change it as shall, but then to add that qualifying language for specific staff that will be teaching that course. How would we word that?
Maybe just add to the end of the sentence on line 92, for professional personnel who will be providing instruction, and then we'll track that language, in annual age-appropriate sexual abuse and that.
Perfect.
All right, don't want to panic. We're going to get an explanation. So if you would look at the amendment now, we have an amendment offered by Representative Casas. And Betsy, when you're ready, you say so, and I'll go. All right, here's what we're going to be voting on. We have an amendment you'll be voting on, all right? you're changing nothing else.
That's correct. That's the only shall.
Huh? That's the only shall, okay? Does everybody understand? Anybody want it re-explained? Anybody need it re-explained? All right, one more time, Betsy, if you would. Oh, okay, no. Line 4 is, you leave it line 4 is at May?
And that's the title section.
So we'll let her, it's just the title section, we'll let her, is that okay with the committee? Let Betsy massage it, all right? Any other questions or comments? Do it, Betsy.
Can I,
All right.
can I,
Yes, sir. You may have a comment now.
so
Here,
just to
look.
clarify that on line 91, that may is becoming a shall. Okay.
Yes. Everybody get that? Now, what you're voting on, one more time, we're making we're letting Betsy handle section 1, that first paragraph there, the title. On 91, we're changing that, would you like it read again? Okay, I say or no, and you know what she's changing there, and then so we're ready to go. I have a motion, now, we have an amendment. Do I have a second on the amendment? I should have gotten that earlier. Do I have I have a motion on the amendment. Do I have a second? I have a motion on the amendment. Do I have a second? I have a second on the amendment. All right, all in favor of the amendment, please indicate by saying aye. All opposed? All right, we have now, we're voting on House Bill 762, a substitute. I guess it is it's the original. LC 337217 as amended. We're voting on House Bill 762 LC 337217 as amended. All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor indicate by saying aye. All opposed? It passes. Okay, your way to go. All right, thank y'all. Remember, again, all my committee chairs, have your meetings, get them in. Now listen, please, next Thursday, we got to get it in. So plan to stay late. We're gonna hear probably 10 or 12 bills, get them for crossover day. Thank y'all. Have a great weekend. Enjoy President's Day, and I appreciate this committee so much. Thank you.